The moving truck had just pulled away from the driveway, leaving behind a beautiful two-story house in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. Commander Jackson Williams stood on his front porch, taking in the peaceful surroundings. After 15 years of serving his country in some of the most dangerous places on earth, this quiet suburban street felt almost too calm. His children's laughter echoed from the backyard where they were already exploring their new playground. His 12-year-old son was pushing his 8-year-old daughter on the swing set, both of them excited about starting fresh in a new place. Their mother, Dr. Michelle Williams, a respected pediatrician, watched them with a smile while unpacking boxes labeled KTCHEN and Fragile. Jackson had chosen this neighborhood carefully. The schools were excellent, the crime rate was practically non-existent, and it was close enough to the naval base for his commute, but far enough to maintain privacy. Most importantly, it was the kind of place where his family could live a normal life, away from the shadows of his classified military work. For someone who had led countless high-risk missions, the simple act of mowing his lawn felt strangely satisfying. That first week, Jackson found himself enjoying the mundane tasks that came with homeownership. He fixed the squeaky garage door, installed new smoke detectors, and even started planning a vegetable garden in the backyard. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though he hadn't formally introduced himself to many of them yet. He'd wave from his driveway or nod politely when passing by during his morning runs. Jackson preferred to keep a low profile. Years of special operations had taught him the value of blending in and avoiding unnecessary attention. His military background wasn't something he advertised. When people asked what he did for a living, he'd simply say he worked for the government and leave it at that. The walls of his home office held his medals and commendations, but they were in a private space, not displayed for visitors to see. Every morning, Jackson would wake up at 5 a.m., a habit formed over years of military discipline. He'd go for a 6-mile run, shower, and then help get the kids ready for school before heading to the base. In the evenings, he'd help with homework, play catch in the backyard, and enjoy family dinners at the dining table they'd brought from their previous home. The community seemed perfect on the surface: manicured lawns, friendly mail carriers, and children riding bikes on the sidewalks. But Jackson had noticed something during his first few weeks. There weren't many families that looked like his in the neighborhood. He'd catch the occasional lingering stare or the slight hesitation when someone realized he was the new homeowner, not the landscaper or delivery person. These small moments didn't bother him much. He'd faced far worse during his career and had learned to pick his battles. His focus was on providing a stable, safe environment for his family. The house represented more than just 4 walls and a roof. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed to achieve. As the days turned into weeks, the Williams family settled into their routine. The kids made friends at school, Michelle set up her home office for telehealth appointments, and Jackson continued his work at the naval base. They hosted their first barbecue, inviting a few neighbors over to break the ice. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Little did Jackson know that his peaceful suburban dream was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. The very skills that had made him one of the military's most valuable assets would soon be put to the test, not on a foreign battlefield, but in his own living room. The quiet life he'd worked so hard to build was about to collide with a world of mistakes, misunderstandings, and systemic failures that would change not just his family's life, but the entire community's understanding of justice and accountability. Detective Raymond Hughes sat at his desk, sorting through a pile of anonymous tips that had come in over the past week. The department had been under pressure to show results in their ongoing fight against neighborhood crime, and his boss was breathing down his neck for a major bust. When his phone rang with another anonymous tip, he listened carefully as the caller described suspicious activities at a house on Oakwood Drive. The caller claimed they'd seen people coming and going at odd hours, carrying large packages and making quick exchanges. They mentioned seeing expensive cars pulling up late at night and leaving within minutes. The address given was 1247 Oakwood Drive, and the caller insisted this was a major operation that needed immediate attention. Detective Hughes quickly typed up the report, but in his rush to get the paperwork processed, he made a critical error. His fingers slipped on the keyboard, and instead of entering 1247, he typed 1274. It was a simple mistake, just 2 numbers transposed, but it would have devastating consequences. The task force assembled quickly. They'd been waiting for a big case like this, something that would make headlines and justify their department's budget. The briefing room buzzed with excitement as officers prepared their gear and reviewed the operation plan. Nobody thought to double-check the address against property records or run a background check on the homeowner. Captain Mitchell, leading the operation, emphasized the need for a surprise raid. "We can't give them time to flush evidence or arm themselves," he told his team. "We go in fast and secure the premises immediately." The officers nodded in agreement, checking their equipment one last time. At 2:30 a.m., the team gathered at their staging point a few blocks away from the target house. They went over the plan once more, breach the front door, secure all occupants, and search for evidence. The address on their paperwork read clearly, 1274 Oakwood Drive. As they approached the quiet suburban street, everything seemed normal. Too normal, some might have thought, but they were focused on the mission. The house at 1274 Oakwood Drive was dark, just like the others on the street. A few lights were on inside, suggesting the occupants might still be awake. The team moved into position silently, surrounding the house. They wore full tactical gear, carrying battering rams and flash grenades. The operation was planned to last no more than 10 minutes from breach to securing the premises. Nobody questioned why such an allegedly major operation was happening in this upscale neighborhood. Meanwhile, inside the house, Jackson Williams was reviewing some classified documents in his home office. His wife and children were asleep upstairs. He'd been working late, preparing for an important briefing the next day. The neighborhood was so quiet he could hear the occasional car passing by on the main road. The mistake in the address wasn't the only failure that night. The department's standard procedure required verification of the target location through multiple sources. They should have checked property records, utility bills, and even done a simple drive-by during daylight hours. But in their eagerness to make a big arrest, they'd skipped these crucial steps. Back at the station, a junior officer named Peterson was filing some paperwork when he noticed something odd. The original tip mentioned 1247 Oakwood Drive, but the raid paperwork showed 1274. He tried to call the team, but they'd already switched to radio silence for the operation. As the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., the tactical team prepared for the breach. They had no idea they were about to raid the home of one of the country's most highly trained military operatives. They didn't know that their drug house was actually the residence of a decorated Navy SEAL commander. And they certainly didn't anticipate the chain of events their mistake would set in motion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose deep flaws in the system and change lives forever. All because of 2 transposed numbers and a series of procedural failures that should never have happened. The silence of the night shattered with a deafening crash as the battering ram struck the front door. Wood splintered, hinges gave way, and the heavy oak door that Jackson had personally selected for his family's safety burst inward. Before the echo of the impact had faded, officers in full tactical gear poured into the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like laser beams. "Police, search warrant, get down on the ground." The shouts filled the air as flash grenades detonated in the living room. The bright flashes turned night into day for split seconds, while the concussive blasts shook picture frames off the walls. Family photos crashed to the floor, glass shattering across the hardwood. The 65-inch television that Jackson had installed just last week exploded in a shower of sparks. Upstairs, his children woke up screaming. His wife bolted upright in bed, her medical training kicking in as she tried to make sense of the chaos below. But it was Jackson who reacted with the precision of his elite training. In one fluid motion, he was out of his office chair and moving toward the hallway, his mind instantly analyzing the situation. He recognized the tactics immediately. Standard police raid procedure. The formation, the commands, the flashbangs. But why here? Why his house? His training told him to defend his position, but his experience told him something else. This was a mistake, and engaging would only make things worse. Federal officer. "I'm Commander Jackson Williams, United States Navy." He called out clearly and calmly, his hands visible as he stepped into the hallway. "My family is upstairs. We are not armed. This is a mistake." But the officers, pumped with adrenaline and focused on their mission, weren't listening. "Get on the ground." Now, One shouted, his weapon trained on Jackson. More officers rushed past, heading for the stairs where his children's cries grew louder. Jackson's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to protect his family, to use his skills to neutralize the threat. But he knew better. These weren't enemies. They were police officers doing their job, even if they were doing it at the wrong house. He slowly lowered himself to his knees, keeping his hands visible. "My identification is in my office," he said steadily. "Second door on the right. You're making a mistake." The team leader barked orders as officers spread throughout the house. Drawers were yanked open, contents scattered across floors. In the kitchen, cabinets were emptied, dishes crashing to the tile. The sound of breaking glass echoed through rooms as officers searched for drugs that didn't exist. Upstairs, an officer had reached the children's rooms. Jackson heard his daughter's terrified screams and his son trying to be brave, asking what was happening. His wife's voice carried down the stairs, explaining she was a doctor, begging them not to hurt her children. Clear, came shouts from different rooms. "Nothing here." "This room's clear too." 20 minutes into the raid, the house looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned, belongings strewn everywhere, walls damaged from aggressive searching. The family's personal items lay exposed and broken. Jackson remained on the floor, watching as his home was destroyed, his mind cataloging every violation, every broken protocol. Finally, an officer entered his office. The wall of military honors caught his attention, photographs with high-ranking officials, medals in display cases, certificates of commendation. The officer's flashlight beam settled on Jackson's Navy SEAL Commander identification badge. Sergeant." The officer called out, his voice suddenly uncertain. "You need to see this." The team leader approached, took one look at the credentials, and his face went pale. He grabbed his radio, his voice now shaky. "All units, cease search immediately. We have a situation." As the reality of their mistake began to sink in, the officer's demeanor changed from aggressive to anxious. They had just raided the home of a Navy SEAL commander, destroyed his property, terrorized his family, and violated numerous procedures in the process. The magnitude of their error was becoming terrifyingly clear. The sergeant's hands trembled slightly as he examined the military credentials. Navy SEAL Commander Jackson Williams, multiple combat deployments, security clearance levels that made his own look like a parking permit. The weight of what they'd done hit him like a physical blow. Around him, his team continued their search, unaware that their world was about to come crashing down. "Everyone stop. Stop right now," he shouted, his voice cracking. The sudden change in his tone made every officer freeze. "We're in the wrong house. This man is a Navy SEAL commander." The silence that followed was deafening. Officers looked at each other in disbelief, then at the destruction they'd caused. Broken furniture, shattered glass, family photos torn from walls, children's toys scattered across floors. What had looked like necessary force moments ago now looked like senseless vandalism. Detective Hughes, who had been coordinating from outside, rushed in when he heard the commotion. His face went from confused to horrified as he took in the scene. Jackson still knelt on the floor, his hands visible, maintaining his composure despite everything. "Sir, we," Hughes stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. Jackson slowly stood up, his movements deliberate and controlled. "My family," he said quietly. "I need to check on my family." The officers parted like the Red Sea as he walked upstairs. He found his wife comforting their children in the master bedroom. His daughter was still crying, clutching her favorite stuffed animal that an officer had thrown aside during the search. His son sat rigid, trying to be strong but clearly traumatized. "It's over," Jackson told them softly. "We're safe. It was a mistake." Downstairs, the reality of the situation was sinking in. Officers began documenting the damage, knowing full well that every broken item, every scratch on the walls, would be evidence of their failure. The team leader was on his radio, calling for supervisors, internal affairs, anyone who could help manage this disaster. Jackson returned downstairs with his phone, methodically photographing every detail. The destroyed front door, estimated replacement cost, $3,000. The shattered television, $2,500. The antique china cabinet his wife had inherited from her grandmother, priceless. But it wasn't just about money. It was about the violation of his home, the trauma to his children, the complete breakdown of proper procedure. "Who's in charge here?" Jackson asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Detective Hughes stepped forward, looking like he wanted to disappear. "I am, sir. Detective Raymond Hughes." "I can't begin to express how sorry." "Save it," Jackson cut him off. "Right now, I want every officer's name and badge number. I want to know who authorized this raid and based on what evidence. And I want to know how you managed to skip every single verification protocol that should have prevented this." As officers provided their information, Jackson made calls, first to his commanding officer, then to his attorney, then to a friend in the Department of Justice. Each conversation was brief and professional, but the implications were clear. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. The damage assessment continued. Beyond the obvious destruction, they'd found more subtle damages. His wife's medical files scattered across her home office, his children's school projects destroyed, classified documents that should never have been exposed to unauthorized personnel. The security implications alone were staggering. By dawn, the street was filled with vehicles, police supervisors, military personnel, lawyers, and eventually news vans. Word had spread quickly about the botched raid on a Navy SEAL commander's home. The peaceful suburban neighborhood had become ground zero for what would become a national conversation about police procedures, racial profiling, and accountability. Jackson stood on his ruined front porch, still in the clothes he'd been wearing when the raid began. His military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically, to turn defeat into victory. This wasn't a battlefield in a foreign country, but it was still a fight, one for justice, accountability, and ensuring this never happened to another family. The sun was barely up when Jackson's phone started ringing nonstop. His commanding officer was the first to call, followed by senior Navy officials who'd heard about the incident through military channels. Each conversation ended with the same message. The Navy was standing behind him, and this would not be ignored. By 8 a.m., Jackson's attorney, David Chen, arrived at the house. He walked through the destruction, taking notes and shaking his head in disbelief. "This isn't just property damage," he said, examining the scattered classified documents. "This is a breach of national security. They had no right to see these files." Jackson had already made a detailed inventory of everything damaged or destroyed. His military precision showed in the methodical documentation, photographs from multiple angles, estimated values, and a timeline of events. But beyond the physical damage, he noted something more important: the psychological impact on his family. His daughter hadn't slept after the raid, refusing to leave her mother's side. His son, usually confident and outgoing, had become quiet and withdrawn. His wife, despite her medical training and usual calm demeanor, was visibly shaken. The sense of safety they'd felt in their new home had been shattered in minutes. The police chief arrived at 9 a.m., looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Chief Thompson had built his career on community policing and accountability, and this incident threatened to destroy everything he'd worked for. He stood in Jackson's living room, surrounded by broken glass and overturned furniture, struggling to find words. "Commander Williams," he began, "I want you to know that we're launching a full investigation. This should never have happened." Jackson's response was measured but firm. "Chief, your officers terrorized my children, destroyed my property, and compromised classified information. An investigation is the minimum. I want to know how this happened and what you're going to do to prevent it from happening again." Meanwhile, Internal Affairs had already begun interviewing the officers involved. Detective Hughes sat in a small room, explaining how he'd transposed the numbers, how they'd skipped verification procedures in their rush to make a big arrest. Each admission made the situation worse. The media caught wind of the story by mid-morning. News vans lined the street, reporters asking neighbors for comments. The narrative was powerful. A decorated military commander, serving his country with honor, had his home destroyed by the very system meant to protect it. The racial element wasn't lost on anyone. A successful black family in an affluent neighborhood mistaken for criminals. Jackson held a press conference on his front lawn that afternoon. Standing tall in his naval uniform, he spoke not just about his family's experience, but about systemic issues that allowed such mistakes to happen. "If this can happen to me, with my background and resources, imagine what happens to families who don't have my advantages," he said. this isn't just about one Rome address. It's about procedures that fail our communities. The Navy's response was swift and unequivocal. The Secretary of the Navy issued a statement condemning the raid and promising full support for Commander Williams. Military lawyers joined Jackson's legal team, bringing resources that few civilian victims of police misconduct could access. By evening, the police chief announced immediate suspensions for all officers involved in the raid. Detective Hughes was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The department's raid protocols were suspended for review, and all planned operations were put on hold. Jackson's neighbors, many of whom had barely known him before, began showing support. They brought food, offered to help clean up, and expressed outrage at what had happened. The community that had seemed distant before now rallied around his family. As night fell, Jackson sat with his wife on their back porch, the only part of their home still feeling peaceful. They discussed their next steps, the lawsuit they would file, the changes they would demand, and how they would help their children heal from this trauma. This wasn't just about their family anymore. It had become about accountability, justice, and ensuring that no other family would endure what they had experienced. The story exploded across national news within 48 hours. Every major network picked it up, and Jackson found himself at the center of a media storm he never wanted. News anchors debated police procedures, legal experts analyzed the constitutional violations, and civil rights leaders pointed to this as another example of systemic problems in law enforcement. Jackson appeared on morning shows not to seek fame, but to highlight the deeper issues. "This isn't about me," he told one interviewer. "This is about accountability. If a Navy SEAL commander isn't safe from these mistakes, who is?" His composed demeanor and thoughtful responses earned him respect across the political spectrum. The police department's problems multiplied daily. Internal investigations revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. The same unit had conducted several questionable raids in recent months, mostly in minority neighborhoods. None had gained attention because the victims lacked Jackson's platform and resources. Chief Thompson faced mounting pressure to resign. Community groups organized protests outside police headquarters. The mayor called emergency meetings. The city council demanded answers. 3 weeks after the raid, Thompson announced his resignation, taking responsibility for the department's failures. Detective Hughes' career unraveled publicly. The investigation showed he'd cut corners before, relied too heavily on anonymous tips, and skipped basic verification steps. His case files were reviewed, revealing patterns of sloppy work that had gone unnoticed. He faced not just suspension, but potential criminal charges for falsifying documents. The lawsuit Jackson filed wasn't just about money. His legal team crafted a comprehensive demand for systemic change. They wanted new training protocols, civilian oversight committees, and mandatory verification procedures for all raids. The city's attorneys knew they couldn't win this fight. Jackson's children slowly began to heal. His daughter started sleeping in her own room again after a month, though she still needed a nightlight. His son joined a youth leadership program, channeling his experience into advocacy. Dr. Williams returned to her practice, but also began volunteering with families affected by police misconduct. The Navy turned this incident into a case study. Military bases across the country held seminars on civil-military relations. Jackson spoke at these events, emphasizing the importance of proper procedures and respect for all citizens. His story became part of training materials for both military and civilian law enforcement. Local businesses stepped up to help. Contractors offered free repairs for the house. Furniture stores donated replacements. The community's response showed Jackson that not everyone shared the biases that led to the raid. His neighbors organized a block party to welcome his family properly, something that should have happened when they first moved in. 6 months after the raid, the city settled the lawsuit for $3.5 million. But Jackson had already announced that most of the money would go to a new foundation. The Williams Family Justice Fund would provide legal support for families who couldn't afford to fight back against police misconduct. The reforms Jackson demanded began taking shape. The police department implemented new verification protocols requiring multiple checks before any raid. They established a civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints. Training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques became mandatory. Jackson's story sparked similar reviews in police departments nationwide. Other cities, seeing the potential for similar disasters, proactively updated their procedures. Law enforcement conferences added sessions on preventing mistaken raids. The phrase "the Williams Protocol" became shorthand for proper verification procedures. Through it all, Jackson maintained his military service. His superiors offered him desk duty or early retirement, but he refused. "My job isn't done," he said. "Neither is this fight." He balanced his naval responsibilities with his new role as an advocate for police reform. The house was eventually restored, better than before. But Jackson kept one reminder of that night: a small crack in the wall of his office, left deliberately unrepaired. "It reminds me why we're doing this," he explained to visitors. "Every family deserves to feel safe in their home. Every community deserves better than what we experienced." 1 year after that fateful night, Jackson stood before a packed auditorium at the National Law Enforcement Training Center. Officers from departments across the country had gathered to hear about the reforms born from his family's ordeal. The Williams Protocol had become the gold standard for raid procedures, and he was there to explain why every step mattered. "That night taught us that good intentions aren't enough," Jackson told the audience. "We need good systems, proper training, and accountability at every level." The officers listened intently as he detailed how simple verification steps could prevent devastating mistakes. The changes in his local police department were remarkable. New Chief Patricia Rodriguez, a reform-minded leader with 25 years of experience, had transformed the culture. Officers now underwent extensive training in bias recognition, community relations, and proper procedure. Raid approvals required multiple levels of verification, including address confirmation through at least 3 independent sources. The Civilian Oversight Committee Jackson had demanded was now a model for other cities. Community members, legal experts, and retired law enforcement officers worked together to review complaints and recommend policy changes. They had real power to investigate and real influence on department decisions. Detective Hughes, after months of legal proceedings, avoided jail time but lost his badge permanently. He now worked with Jackson's foundation, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. "I got lazy, I got careless, and I nearly destroyed lives," he admitted in training sessions. "Every shortcut you take puts someone's family at risk." The Williams Family Justice Fund had helped dozens of families navigate the legal system. They provided lawyers, supported policy changes, and offered counseling services. Jackson often met with these families personally, listening to their stories and offering guidance. His military discipline and strategic thinking proved invaluable in organizing effective advocacy. His children showed remarkable resilience. His daughter had started a youth group focused on building trust between kids and local police. She organized events where officers played basketball with neighborhood children, helped with homework, and shared meals with families. His son was preparing for college, planning to study law with a focus on civil rights. The neighborhood had transformed too. What began as a traumatic incident had united the community in unexpected ways. Monthly block parties became traditions. Diversity workshops brought neighbors together to discuss bias and inclusion. The Homeowners Association created a welcome committee to properly greet new families, ensuring no one felt like an outsider. Jackson continued his military service while expanding his advocacy work. He testified before Congress about the need for national standards in law enforcement. He consulted with police departments wanting to implement the Williams Protocol. He spoke at military bases about the intersection of service and civilian rights. The house itself stood as a symbol of recovery and resilience. Where once there had been broken doors and shattered windows, now there were stronger foundations and clearer purpose. The small crack in Jackson's office wall remained, a reminder of why the work continued. 5 years later, studies showed that departments using the Williams Protocol had 0 mistaken raids. Property damage during legitimate operations decreased by 70%. Community trust in police improved significantly in areas where the reforms were implemented. Jackson received numerous awards for his advocacy, but he always redirected attention to the broader mission. "This isn't about recognition," he would say. "It's about making sure no family goes through what we did." His military medals shared space with civic honors, each representing a different kind of service to his country. The story that began with a terrible mistake had evolved into a movement for positive change. Jackson's calm response to injustice, his strategic approach to reform, and his dedication to helping others had transformed a personal trauma into a national catalyst for improvement. As Jackson often said in his speeches, sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but in our own communities. And sometimes the most important victories are the ones that protect our neighbors, not just our nation. His family's ordeal had indeed changed the landscape of law enforcement, proving that even from the darkest moments, light and positive change can emerge.